those who... Okay, so the subject is the idea of one of the 10 Commandments is do not steal. In other words, Judaism, of course, there's a lot in the 10 Commandments about the sanctity of life, that your life belongs to you, and it's sort of God's gift to you, and a person cannot take away the life of somebody else. It's a capital crime because every person was created in the image of God, correct? However, in Judaism, in addition, there's also the sanctity of a person's possessions. One of the 10 Commandments is, first of all, not to covet somebody else's possessions. Oh, I didn't think about this, but this week in Deuteronomy, we're reading the 10 Commandments again, because Moshe repeats the 10 Commandments. So tomorrow we'll discuss that. So it's appropriate that now we're going to study a mitzvah that's tied to the 10 Commandments, which is do not steal. So do not steal. Do not steal is you have to honor the sanctity of someone else's possession. And that's straightforward. Every system of law has a law, do not steal. That's where the simple part ends. Now we start getting complicated. Part happens. So I stole. I have to return. When do I have to return? To whom do I have to return? Are there cases where I don't have to return? What happens if do I have to return the object, or could I return the monetary value of the object? There's all kinds of twists and turns, and the Talmud is full of it. So what we're going to do full of such examples and scenarios, we're not going to go into everything. Just a little sampling of how we think about the questions of ownership and returning stolen objects. The first thing we want to establish, and again, as always, if anybody has any questions, please jump in and ask questions. Don't be shy. First thing we want to establish is that the Torah there's a verse in the Torah that says that if I steal something, I have to return the object. In other words, it's not that I can say, well, I like your car. You know what? I'll steal your car. And then when it comes time to pay, I'll write you a check of what you paid for the object. In other words, no, I cannot fulfill my obligation. If I stole, I cannot return monetary compensation. I have to return the object. That is the preferable case. Of course, we're going to get into cases where that is impossible. Why? Because it's gone. Because I stole something and then I ate it, or I stole it and I used it, or it destroyed, or something happened. Then I have monetary compensation. But monetary compensation is only the second best thing. The obligation is, I take your object, I have to return this object as it is. How do I know this? Not because I'm so smart, but because the Torah says so explicitly. And that's what we're going to look at right now. I'm sharing it on the screen. Stolen article, Torah. This is a verse in Leviticus, the third book of the Torah, chapter 5, verse 23. And it shall be, when he had sinned and he is guilty. It's the context of stealing something. And he shall return the article which he had robbed, or the funds which he had withheld, or the item which had been deposited with him, or the article which he had found. These are all different cases where I happen to have your object and I have no ownership of the object. What are the cases? One case, the first is I robbed, I stole your shirt. I have to return it. I owe you money, I didn't pay you, I have to pay you. Or I have your object because you asked me to hold something for you. It was deposited to me. You're going to Florida, you say, could you hold my goldfish? Okay, now I have your goldfish. This is your object. That's another scenario where I have what belongs to you. And finally, the scenario is if I find something that I know it says your name on it, I know it's yours, I have an obligation to return it to you. But what's interesting about these cases is that it says clearly, the Torah says I have to return the actual object. So I find your shirt. I can't say, well, I like the shirt. It looks good on my grandkid. I'll keep it for myself, and I will write you a check for the value. No, you have to return the actual object. Right? So far, so good. So far, straightforward. Now, if I cannot return the actual object, then I pay what? Then I pay the compensation. Okay, fine. Now let's think of a question. The question becomes like this, and this becomes interesting. What happens if I consume something, I eat something, and I didn't know that it belonged to you? Okay, So in other words, I stole something from you, but there was no intent. I'm not trying to commit a crime. All right, I walk into the park. Okay, I don't want to get into a specific example. I see an apple. I think it's ownerless. I eat it. Then you come to me and say, you ate my apple. Okay, so I have to pay. Do I have to pay? Now, this gets into a philosophical question, because if you're going to say that, why am I paying? Because I did something wrong? In this case, I didn't do anything wrong. Nevertheless, the law would be, I have to pay. Why do I have to pay? I have to pay not because I did something wrong. I have to pay because when I took your object, it's not about intent. It's not about if I did a crime. I took your object. I have the obligation to repay it. If I can't repay it because I ate it, then I have to pay you for it. In other words, if you look at the idea that I have to repay because I did something wrong, in this case, I did nothing wrong. There's an apple on the table. I thought it was ownerless. I ate it. Why do I have to pay? I'm not a criminal. I didn't know I did anything wrong. It was by mistake. So the answer is, just like if I had not eaten it, it's clear I have to return the apple. It's your apple. I have to return it to you. So once I eat it, I also have to return it to you. Why? Once I eat it, I have to pay compensation because I can't return the actual object. Okay. Also, that's pretty straightforward. Now we get to an interesting case. This is a case in the Mishnah. Okay. I steal an apple. I give it to Anne. I don't tell Anne that it's stolen. She eats lunch. She eats the apple. Now the question becomes, the owner comes and finds out that his apple was stolen by me and given to Anne, and Anne ate it. Now the owner has to bill somebody, has to collect the theft. Remember, it could be an apple, it could be $1, it could be an Apple computer worth $2,000, or it can be the Apple store. It doesn't matter, right? The point here is, it doesn't matter the amounts. $1, $1 million, $1 billion, doesn't matter. The point is, I steal something, I give it to an unsuspecting person, that person consumes it, that person eats it, that person uses it, right? For example, I steal tickets to the playoffs. What do they call the baseball? To the World Series. I steal a ticket for the World Series. I give it to Anne. Anne got box seats, front row World Series games. After the game, the owner comes and says, "Where was my ticket?" I say, "I stole it, but I didn't use it. Anne ate it." So now the question is, are you going to bill me? Are you going to bill Anne? Are you going to bill both? Are you going to bill none? How do I deal with this problem? Okay. Remember, it's the World Series. It's a very valuable thing. It's not just an apple here. So a very interesting law in the Mishnah. Very interesting law. So first of all, I want to take a guess. In other words, you could look at it and say, well, who committed the crime? Menachem. I committed the crime. I stole the tickets to the World Series. You could look at it, well, who consumed it? Who benefited? Who benefited and benefited? Maybe Anne should pay, but Anne didn't she did anything wrong. Yeah, but we just finished saying that when it comes to repaying the theft, it doesn't really matter if you knew you did something wrong or not. The bottom line is, if you use something that belongs to somebody else, you have to repay. So who's on the hook? Do I have to pay? Does Anne have to pay? Does nobody have to pay? Do both of us have to pay? Go ahead, Sarah.
If you find a well ticket and you've given it to someone or used it yourself, and then the owner comes and says, "Oh, I had left it here. Did anyone take it?" What do you do?
Okay, so now you're broadening the question, and it's a good question. The answer would be that you have to look at the laws of lost objects. In other words, but that's another whole area of the law. In other words, sometimes when I find a lost object, I'm allowed to keep it. Sometimes I'm not allowed to use it. So if it's a case that I'm allowed to use it, we don't bill anybody. If it's a case that I'm not allowed to take it, then that's basically theft. So we're back to the theft question. You see what I'm saying? You're expanding it to the lost object, which is complicating it, but I'm trying to stay simple. Let's do simple, because otherwise we'll be here all day just trying to figure out the case. So let's try to stay simple. I stole your tickets. I don't know if you're a baseball fan, assuming you are. I stole your tickets, box seat tickets to the World Series. I gave it to my friend Anne. Anne goes, she's unsuspecting. She doesn't know that I'm a thief. If she would, she wouldn't be sitting next to me. She'd be watching her pocketbook. In any case, what you would do is, in any case, what happens is, in any case, Anne used it and enjoyed it. Now the owner shows up and says, okay, what do? I paid a lot of money for my World Series tickets. So who do they bill? Do they bill me, the thief, even though I didn't use it? Do they bill Anne, the person who consumed the product, even though she didn't know she's consuming a stolen product? Do we bill both? Do we bill none? That's the issue that's the first step of our journey here to understand the laws of repaying theft from the perspective of the Talmud.
I suspect there should be a disagreement because so on the other hand, on one hand, it's the person who stole it is guilty, definitely. But on the other hand, we just said that if you didn't know, that you still have to pay for the apple.
Right. So,
but I'm kind of on the side of if you stole it, you have to take responsibility. But you cannot discard.
You're saying that you're looking at the repaying as a way to educate or punish or to control behavior. But that's not necessarily the only way. The verse that we said in the beginning, Leviticus 5:2-3. If I steal something, I have to return it. It's about restoring the object to the rightful owner. It's not so much about public policy. It's not so much about educating the population, right? It's a very simple thing. If I find your object on the floor, I return it. If I ate your object, I return it. My guilt is not so relevant to this question. That's from the other side. On the other hand, you say, well, the thief has to repay. You'll see later, in some cases, the thief has to pay double. So we do want to educate the thief. Bottom line is, it's a very simple concept. You have to return the lost object. Once you start drilling in, it becomes a mess. It becomes complicated and detailed. And by drilling in and analyzing, and we're not just sitting here together to figure out what to do if I steal your World Series tickets. We're really trying to figure out how does the Torah look at ownership, and how does the Torah look at restoring ownership, and maybe we can derive some lessons and some philosophical points either today or at another occasion. But the bottom line is we first have to start delving in and figuring out and defining the terms. What is the concept of repayment, and why do we repay? And that will really inform our question of who repays. So this is a very interesting case. The answer to this question is, I'll say it right now, the answer is, but not both, either of us.
Yeah, but how do you decide?
So good question. Let's say I stole someone's World Series tickets. That person whose tickets were stolen has a choice. They can go after the thief and say, thief, you have to pay me. And then that thief pays them back if you can get me to pay. Or they can go to the person who consumed and used the tickets. Now, who would they choose? It depends. One way to think about the question of who to choose is that all the lawyers know, who do you sue? You sue the person with the assets. Let's say there were 5 people responsible, right? Who are you going to sue? You're going to sue the person with the insurance policy or the person with the assets. So you always, even in today's world, in the law, you have a decision. If you have multiple people responsible, you're going to go after the person who's easiest to collect from. Okay? So that's one angle. Another angle, it's possible that the thief, it wasn't like today, like with this law and order. If we're living in areas with a law where the law is not so powerful, could be the person who was stolen from is afraid to go after the thief because the thief may be a bully, right? So that person has the choice. If I stole your World Series tickets and I gave it to my unsuspecting friend and my friend went to the World Series, in other words, my friend consumed the fruit, but I stole the fruit, the answer is the owner could take from one or the other. He can't take from both. If the value of the tickets are $1,000, he can't collect $2,000. But it's his decision. The person can go after the thief because he stole, or the person can go after the person who consumed because they consumed. That's the Talmudic case. That's the Mishnah. That's the foundation. Then we start getting, and this is just laying the ground to the discussion that we were going to try to have today. Of course, if we're able to do so.
Well, that's a very creative and at the same time very practical solution.
Right. So the answer basically is both people have an obligation to restore the lost object. The thief has an obligation to restore, and the person who consumed it has an obligation to restore. Who is going to be who's practically going to be the one to pay? That's up to the person collecting.
And he'll go for the one with more.
Easiest,
assets.
either more assets, or sometimes the one with more assets is more intimidating, right? You don't want to start up with the town bully. You don't want to start up with the guy who's the organized crime. Maybe you do want to, it's up to you. But I'm just saying you have a choice. You now can go after the thief, the person who stole, or you can go after the person who consumed because they consumed, and both the thief, the person, one stealing has an obligation to repay, or the one that consumed has the obligation to repay.
Now,
So that- Yes.
Rabbi, the person who consumes the article, only if that person knows that it was a stolen object.
No,
Or
no, because
if you-
again, if I have something that's yours, I have an obligation to return it to you. It has nothing to do with a crime. It has nothing to do if I'm a good person or a bad person or my intent or my intention or my criminal intent. If I happen to walk down the street and I have your pocketbook, for whatever reason, I found your pocketbook. If I have your object, I have to return it. If I have your apple, I have to return it. If I eat your apple, I have to return it. If I can't return the apple, I have to pay.
Sorry, if you pass it on to another person and that person goes,
Idea. Whoever had, let's think about a pocketbook, because something that was not consumed, right? Something that was not consumed. We all understand that if I steal okay, that gets more complicated, but we understand it's a logical concept that if I take something of yours, I have to return it. If I give it to my grandmother, she has to return it to you. It's not that she's a bad person, but she has your pocketbook.
but if she's consumed it without knowing that you stole it.
Oh, so consumed, the person who consumed it derived benefit. So if you derive benefit, again, we're not saying you're a bad person, but if I derive benefit, I have to return it. And if I can't return it, I have to pay for it.
There's no free lunch. That's the bottom line.
I'm sorry?
There is no free lunch.
There's no free lunch. But again, it's not a question. We like to think of crime and punishment as moral guilt. This has nothing to do with moral guilt. If I have your apple, I have to return it. If I ate your apple, I have to return it. The fact that I don't know that it was your apple is separate. It's not, because again, if I have to return it, it doesn't mean I'm a bad guy. It just means that I have to return it. Imagine I get into your car and I drive 5 miles by mistake, on purpose. I thought it was my car. Okay, I drove 5 miles. I have to return the car and replenish the gas. I consumed your gas. I have to return it. Am I a bad guy? No, I'm a little bit senile. I'm a little bit confused. I can't tell the difference between my car and your car. But the bottom line is, it's not a question of guilt. It's not a question of guilt. It's a simple question of, if I have something that belongs to you, I need to repay. If I consume something that belongs to you, so I don't have it. Actually, I do have it. If I used it, I spent it. Now it's gone. Because of me, it can't be returned. If that's the case, I have to pay. That is not a statement about my moral status as a human being. I could be a very good person. I took those tickets to the World Series because I did not know they were stolen. That's wonderful. I'm still a good citizen. I still will go to heaven, but I have to write you a check to pay for the tickets to the World Series because I consumed something that did not belong to me. Not that I'm a bad person. Simply, I have to return it. If I can't return it, I have to write the check.
Thank you.
It also frees you from maintaining guilt with it, because even if you don't do it knowingly, if you know that you've done it, you can still feel bad for it.
Right. So you're saying that there's an advantage if I have to pay, and I pay it. There's also a psychological benefit if I am a moral person and I feel bad, and guilt would eventually cause me psychological stress, and maybe I'm going to have to go to my shrink and have to pay for my shrink. So I may as well just pay return the item, and I'll save money on my shrink. Is basically what you're telling me. Yes, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, and it also makes perfect sense, because if you ate something, you consumed something, you used something, you have to be prepared to pay, whether you knew about it or not. It's just simple as that.
Right. It only makes sense if you separate the obligation to repay from guilt. Because I come to your house, you give me tea. I drink it. If I knew it was stolen, if I knew I'm going to have to pay for it, I wouldn't drink it. Right? But as long as you're willing to separate the obligation to repay from the question of guilt, it makes sense. To the extent that it's hard for us to do so, then it makes it hard for us to accept this law. Because in our mind, who pays? The person who's guilty. I'm not guilty, I don't want to pay. I did nothing wrong, I don't want to pay. But the Talmud is teaching us it's not so much about how guilty I am, it's not about intent, right? You go to law school the first year, they're going to try to discuss what is the crime? Is the crime the action or is the crime the intent, right? If I harm you, but I didn't intend to harm you, right? Or if I intended to harm you, but I didn't harm you, right? If I pull a gun, this is the classic case. I pull out my gun and I shoot you. Problem is, there were no bullets in the gun, but I didn't know. So could you prosecute me for being attempted murder? Well, attempted murder, I mean, I wanted to kill you if I could, but there were no bullets in it. So you're going to put me in prison for 20 years because I shot you with a gun without bullets. So this is the philosophy of the law. And the question is, how related is the question of intent to the question of crime and payment and punishment? But this is not so much punishment. Repaying the lost object is not so much punishment. It's more a question of practicality. If I have your object, I have to repay. If for whatever reason, if I have to return it, if I consumed it, I have to return it. If I can't return it because I consumed it, then I have to pay the money. But it's not a question of guilt. It's a question of restoring something to its rightful owner. Yes, Deborah.
What if, like, let's say you didn't know that it was yours and, like, something happened to it?
If I didn't know it was mine and something happened to it, that's a very good question. In some cases, they'll have to return to me anyway. In some cases, there's something called yeush, which means if I give up hope, if I don't know something is mine and I don't think I'm ever going to get it again, in some cases that means it's not mine anymore. But now you'll ask your brother Moshe Binyamin, who's learning about Metzia. First, he's learning Elam Metzias, which there we learn about the laws of yeush, which is giving up hope. And in Jewish law, if you give up hope, it's a little hard. It's a little hard to maintain ownership if you have the question of yeush.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. The answer is it's a very complicated answer. The answer is it depends, right? But it's a very good question. So thank you for asking the question. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to read a piece of Talmud inside just so we get the feel and the flavor. So I'm going to share the screen here. Talmud, Tractate Baba Kama, page 111b. Rav Chisda, which is the name of the Talmudic sage, says as follows: if one misappropriated an article, I'm on the first page at the bottom, one on the bottom, page one on the bottom. Yes, Rav Chisda said, if one misappropriated an article, and before the owner gave up hope of recovering it, another person came and consumed it. The English translation is not perfect. Literally in Hebrew, it's hagoyzel umachil. I steal it and I feed it to somebody else. The owner has the option of collecting payment from either the one or the other, right? I can either take it, the owner of the tickets can either bill the person who stole it, or he can bill the person who consumed it, who used those tickets. The reason being that so long as the owner did not give up hope of recovery, the misappropriated article is still in the ownership of the original possessor. So the reason that the Talmud gives a little bit different than what I said, I'm going to try to explain what the Talmud is saying. What the Talmud is saying is as follows. I stole your tickets. I gave it to Anne. I get onto a plane and I run off to the Cayman Islands. You can't catch me. I'm in a tax haven. You can't catch me. So you, the owner of the tickets, go to Anne and you say, Anne, please pay me for my tickets. What does Anne say? Anne says, I don't know who you are. I have no interaction with you. I have no business with you. I didn't get it from you. I didn't take it from you. Go take a hike. I have no idea who you are. Right? If she says, I got it from the thief is in the Cayman Islands. But what's the fallacy of that argument? The fallacy of that argument is that Anne does have business with you, the owner of the tickets. Why? Because the owner of the tickets, wherever those tickets are, they're still yours. So Anne says, I got it from Menachem, I got it from the thief. Doesn't matter. These items belong to the original owner. If you took them and you paid them and you used it to get into the stadium, you yourself took something with no intention, no bad intention, but you took something that belongs to the original owner, and therefore the original owner could collect from you. That's what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, right? For as the reason being that so long as the owner did not give up hope of recovery, which is another whole discussion, the giving up hope, we're not going to get into that today. The misappropriated article is still in the ownership of the original possessor. That is what the Talmud says. Okay. Okay, we have a little chart just to review. Let's see if this will work. Case. I ate fruit that I thought were ownerless. Do I have to pay the owner? The law is yes. The reason is because it doesn't matter. It's not a question of if I'm a good person or a bad person. The bottom line is I ate your item, I have to repay it. Now the second case, a thief gave me stolen food to eat. I didn't know the food was stolen. Do I have to pay or does the thief have to pay? The answer, either one. In other words, it's up to the owner. The owner can go after the thief or the owner can go after the person who consumed the fruit. Why? Because the owner has a claim against both. In other words, both people took something that belongs to the owner. The thief took your tickets, and the person the thief passed the tickets to also took something directly from the owner. Why? Because it doesn't matter where the tickets are. If they're mine, if they belong to the owner, then wherever they may be, they belong to the owner. So just because you got them from the thief, but it's like you took a possession from the possession of the original owner, and therefore if you consumed something that belongs to the original owner, you are on the hook. The owner has to pay. And so far, that's straightforward. So far, we at least can make peace with this. Now we enter one new layer of complication, just because it's 12:35.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does the owner need to prove his ownership?
Yes, let's assume all this is clear. Let's say we all agree, there's no dispute about that, right? If we a dispute about who's the owner, then that opens up other avenues of the law, how to figure out who is the owner, right? Then you go to the laws of chazaka. Maybe we come back next week, we talk about the laws of ownership and how to establish ownership, which is another whole, what they call sugya, another whole unit of law within every body of law, but also within Jewish law. But now we're assuming the ownership is not being contested. We all agree that the tickets belong to the original owner. We all agree that I stole it from the original owner. We all agree that I passed it on to an unsuspecting. I gifted it to an unsuspecting person. That person went and used it, enjoyed the World Series, also bought Coca-Cola, and enjoyed the game and caught one of the balls. Whatever happened doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that person's unsuspecting. Nevertheless, that person may have to pay if the original owner chooses to go after them, because the original owner can go after either the thief for taking something from their possession or the person who consumed something from their possession. But Anne's going to say she didn't get it from the original owner. She got it from the thief. Nah, it doesn't work that way, because those tickets, wherever they are, they belong to the original owner. That's all simple. Now life, so far life is easy. Now we're going to complicate life because it's 12:30 and we need to spice things up so we don't fall asleep here. Correct. Go ahead, Sarah. Did you have a question? I'm not sure. Yeah? Oh, it's good? Oh, good. Okay, fine. Now we're going to complicate. Complicate is like this. What? Go ahead.
I don't think it's so complicated.
It's not so complicated. So let me try to complicate it.
All right.
If I can't complicate this,
Right.
then I'm not Talmudic, because the Talmud has to figure out how to complicate simple issues.
All right. Then I'm missing something.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Here's the case. I steal an apple
You're stealing apple.
from the original owner. We know what happens if I eat it. We know what happens. We know the law is I have to repay. Okay. We know if I fed it to you, to the unsuspecting person who got the apple, you also have to pay. What happens if I didn't give it to you? What happens if I sold it to you? Oh, now it gets tricky. So I steal something and I sell it to an unsuspecting buyer.
Oh, I didn't
So
see
now now it's complicated. Now there's an element of, what are you going to say? You're going to say so here's the scenario. Scenario is I break into your house, I steal your object. It's worth $100. 100 million, doesn't really matter. All right, $100. I sell it to Ann. Ann gives me $100. I take my $100, get on to the next flight, check out. I'm in the Cayman Islands. You can't find me. The original owner comes to Ann and says, Ann, remember the Mishnah says, remember the Talmud says that the original owner can go after you. So now the original owner wants Ann's money, wants the object back. And says, 1 second, I paid $100. The original owner says, yeah, but you didn't pay me the $100. You paid the thief $100. Go after the thief. And now the unsuspecting buyer is not only going to have to return the object that she enjoyed. That's one problem. But what happens if she's going to have to repay? Now the unsuspecting buyer now has to return the object, and in some cases lose the $100 or the $100 million. Is that a fair result? Is that the proper result? And that's where things get a little complicated. So again, not a case of I stole it and fed it to her. Then everyone says, look, Ann, you enjoyed it. You didn't pay for it. So it's not so terrible if you'll pay for it. So you went to a World Series game, you'll pay for the ticket. It's not the end of the world. They say it's not so terrible. Even though had I known that I would have to pay for it, I probably wouldn't go. Doesn't matter. You went, you enjoyed it, you consumed it, you pay for it. But what happens if Ann did not get it from the thief? She actually bought it from the thief. You bought it from the thief. Now what's going to happen is who takes the loss? And the unsuspecting buyer is going to have to return the object, lose the $100. The thief is sitting on the beach in the Cayman Islands with his feet up in the sand, counting his cash. And the unsuspecting buyer is going to be the one who is in trouble, and they're going to lose the $100. Is that
if Talmud would
just say, if we follow the logic that we said so far, that's the desired result. The problem is that that would be logic. That would be the logical conclusion. The problem is we're a little bit uncomfortable with that result. And the question is, are we going to interfere and start, massaging the law to get a different result? And the answer is, in some cases we do, because in addition to law is also here to create public policy. And as you will see, when the sages of the Talmud are interested in public policy, and there's other concerns, and therefore we're going to start making exceptions to the rule. So it's not in the Torah, it's not the biblical law. Biblical law would say, and you got to pay back.
It's still his.
It's still his. And you're going to say, well, I paid $100 to the thief. Go find the thief. He's off somewhere in Mexico. Good luck, right? So you're going to have to lose because you have an object that doesn't belong to you. But you're going to see in a minute, the rabbis are going to say, it's not so simple. We want to create public policy. If we have time, we're going to understand that the rabbis weren't the only ones to do this. It was done in Europe also, the common law. And you'll see the difference between the way the rabbis did it and the way it was done in Europe. And we're going to start comparing and contrasting, provided that God blesses us with the time, because we are going against the tight deadline at 12:55 when we have to go and pick up Isaac from camp. Okay, so what's the idea here? The idea here is as follows. The idea here is, what would be the result? What would the marketplace look like in a world where the unsuspecting buyer had to pay in the case of theft? Okay, stop a second. What would the world look like? The answer is, what would look like, there would be no marketplace. It would freeze the markets. Remember, we're living in a world where if you want to buy milk, you have a credit card, and you have a bank card, or if you're old fashioned, you have a checkbook. There's a bank, and the bank has cash, or you have money. In the ancient world, Talmudic times, right? The access to cash the money wasn't in cash. People had assets. People had potatoes, the agricultural society, people had fruit. If you want to buy milk, I come and say, Ann, you trade. Or you trade and I say, you give me some milk, I'll give you an apple. Or I say, give me cash. Here's my apple, give me cash. Okay, imagine if every time I need a transaction, I now have to, I needed someone to buy something for me to allow the marketplace to function. Could you imagine if the buyer is going to say, I am not buying this apple from you until you can prove that you didn't steal it? Because the end buyer doesn't want to be stuck with stolen merchandise, because then they're going to have to repay and they're going to lose. So what the end buyer is going to say is, you want me to buy something from you? Prove that it's yours. Now, it is a very complicated thing to do, to prove the chain of ownership for every for every commodity, for every apple that I have, to prove that it's mine. It's a very complicated thing to do. Therefore, the sages instituted what they call takanat hashuk. Takanat hashuk means what's the word I'm looking for? Is a takana I guess regulation of the marketplace, not regulation. It's I forget the English word that we use here. We use the ordinance of the market. The ordinance of the market is, because we want a marketplace, because we want the transfer of goods and materials and money, the rabbis say as follows: if you bought something and you were unsuspecting, you're protected. So while the law would say, in other words, the strict letter of the law would say, if I steal an object and I sell it to you, and then I check out of town, the letter of the law would say, the logic of the law would say that the original owner can go after you and collect that item and not have to reimburse you. The rabbis say no. The rabbis say, look, if you bought something, you're protected. You're not going to have to lose. And you'll see in a minute that that's trickled down to European countries. Some people say that the Jews brought it, but that's another discussion. But I just want to add what the sages do a little bit different. The sages, however, make a little bit of an exception, and they do it very interesting. And you'll see later, we'll bring some cases, and you'll see how this is the best way to balance everybody's rights. The original owner can get their item back, provided they pay you what you paid the thief. Okay, here's the case. I broke into your house. I stole your grandmother's wedding dress. It has sentimental value for you. Okay, for you, it's worth $10,000, right? I take it, I sell it on the marketplace. I sell it to Ann for $2,000. Okay, what is the law? The law is, even though the Torah would say Ann has to return it, rabbis say, no, we got to protect the marketplace. We want to protect the buyer. We want to protect buyers, because if people are not going to buy, there'll be no commerce. There'll be no commerce. There'll be no economy. There'll be no economy. Everyone's going to die from hunger. Okay. So the rabbis say we got to protect the buyer. So Anne does not have to return your grandmother's wedding dress that to you has unbelievable value. She does not have to return that object. It's hers. However, we also want to protect the original owner. So you say, you want your grandmother's wedding dress back? No problem. Pay Anne. What should she pay? The value of the object? No. Pay Anne whatever she paid the thief. Like this, we try to make everybody happy. The original owner gets their item back. The buyer doesn't take a loss. And everybody lives happily ever after. Now, it seems so simple and so straightforward, but you're going to see what the Europeans did, and you'll see that they were not as elegant as the Talmud. And they did something similar, but they missed out this last piece, and therefore they have their result. Their result is much worse in many cases. So we have a few minutes left. I'm going to try to illustrate what I just said, and you're going to see how sweet this is. Hopefully, with God's help. Yes, Lord. Okay. Okay. So let's look. Let's see if what do I have here?
Page 3.
The Ordinance of the Talmud, page 3. I'm just going to read. This is from the Cincinnati Talmud. It's not the actual words of the Talmud, but it's sort of the definition. We're going to read the definition. The Ordinance of the Market, Takanas Hashuk, literally the Ordinance of the Market, which provides, in the case of sales made in open market, for the return of the purchased article to the owner, who would have to pay the purchaser the price he had. In other words, if the original owner wants the item back that Ann bought, he would have to pay Ann whatever Ann paid the original owner, whatever Ann paid the thief. The ordinance was enacted in the interest of trade, for unless so protected, people would be afraid to buy goods for fear lest they are stolen. Beautiful. Let's go to see what the Europeans did. And before we get into the historical questions where they got this idea from, you will see that they did not do exactly what the Talmud did, and therefore their result is not as good. So, of course, this is my totally unbiased opinion here, and we will see what happens. So, market overt and common law. Okay, so market overt is the same thing. Overt means revealed, and the European in England in the common law they had the same idea. The idea was as follows: where goods are sold in market overt, according to the usage of the market, the buyer acquires a good title to the goods, provided he buys them in good faith and without notice of any defect or want of title on the part of the seller. This is from the Law Sales of Goods Act in 1893. Later it was reestablished in 1979, which is when this idea was codified, but the idea is hundreds of years earlier in the common law. What are they saying? They're saying the same idea. They're saying in England, there were certain markets in London, they're named, they had certain markets. If you bought something in that market during the daytime hours, as we will see later, in specific hours, you are protected as long as you did not know that it was stolen. And in that case, if you buy something, you get to keep it, and you're protected even if you bought stolen goods, even if the seller had no title. Okay, I'm going to spill the beans here. What's the big difference between market overt and the ordinance of the market, which the Talmud has? So in Europe, the European law, the common law, in their scenario, their original owner has no recourse whatsoever. So think about a case. Let's say I stole your grandmother's object that's worth $10,000. But I'm a thief. I don't have time to collect $10,000. So I sell it to Ann for $100. Under the common law, Ann gets to keep it. And the original owner has no recourse whatsoever. And Ann just made a killing because she paid $100 and she got something that's worth $10,000. Okay? So the common law, what the common law does, it protects the interest of commerce. It protects the markets completely. And the loss is the original owner takes all the loss. What does Jewish law do? Jewish law says, one second. If all you're trying to do is protect the commerce, we can get a better result while still protecting the buyer. So go back to the case. If I stole an item that's worth $10,000, I sell it to Ann for $100. The original owner reimburses Ann $100 and gets her $10,000 item. Now everybody's happy. The market is protected because people are not afraid to buy because they know that even if it's a stolen item, they're going to get their investment back. On the other hand, the original owner has the recourse to choose to buy back something that belongs to them. And they'll be able then to, as long as they're willing to reimburse not the cost that the person paid. And you'll see later a case in the Wall Street Journal, which is the exact same thing happened. And the result was absurd under the common law, but under the Talmudic law, the result would have been much better. But this is the big idea. So I already said the big idea. Now we'll give one more scenario, specific scenario. Questions, comments, please share. Otherwise, we're just going to go for the finish line.
So we're assuming that thief is nowhere to be found, right?
We're assuming the thief is nowhere to be found. If the thief could be found in the common law, yeah, they're just going to put him in prison. Let's say, even if you can find him, let's say he has no money to repay. Doesn't matter, right? The thief will go to prison in the common law. But you can go after him to repay. But assuming you can't find him, or if you did find him, it happens to be that, or if you did find him, he has no money, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't help that you know who stole if the guy doesn't have assets to repay. Okay, let's go for the Wall Street Journal, the case of stolen art. You're going to have to forgive my mispronunciation of all these European names, which I can't pronounce. Okay, thieves broke into Lincoln's Inn, one of London's 4 legal societies known as the Inns of the Court, through which lawyers gain admission to the English bar, and beat the watchman unconscious. They took 3 portraits, and now 2 have turned up. So they stole art, and 2 of them turned up. Thomas Gainsborough's portrait of Sir John Skinner and Francis Hargrave's portrait of Sir Joshua Reynolds were purchased, rolled up by Jim Groves, a collector of cake stands at the Bermondsey Court Market on the city South Bank early in March for 145 euros. Thinking the pictures might be of some value, but still apparently unaware of their illustrious authorship, Mr. Groves took them to Sotheby's Bond Street. Lucy Hudson, a British picturist specialist, recognized the fine portraits as work by the 18th century archivals, but worried that Mr. Groves wasn't the true owner. She checked with the art loss register, which confirmed that the 2 had been among those stolen from Lincoln's Inn. Still missing is Gainsborough's portrait of Sir William Pitt, who in 1783 became George III's prime minister at age 24. Okay, that's just the case. Now, what is the law? Normally, under British law, Mr. Groves would have to yield possession to the owners. In this case, the underwriters that settle the claim. They would then offer it back to Lincoln's Inn in exchange for the claim's money. However, it would seem that Mr. Grove's purchase at Bermondsey's Market actually brought him good title to the works, under an archaic exception to the rule that a thief cannot pass good title. Usually a thief cannot pass good title. This is an exception. The anomaly called market overt, in a mix of French and English indicative of its origins in Norman England, validates transactions at some 20 specific outdoor markets, including Bermondsey. There between dawn and sunset, buyers can acquire good title to stolen goods. This is August 26, 1993. Okay, what's happening here? Usually, if I buy stolen art, I have to return it to the owner, which is in this case the insurance company, because they paid for the claim. Because they bought it in open market, one of those 20 markets, the person could keep, the person who bought from the thief could keep the art, even though he paid 240 euro. Meanwhile, what is he getting? Something that's worth a tremendous amount of money. And that's not the greatest result, but that's the law. What does the Talmud do in that scenario? So that scenario would say the art goes back to the owner. We're going to protect the buyer. You know what? We're going to write him a check for 145 euros. Okay? And everybody's happy. We protect commerce, but we also protect the original owner. And that's just, we have to stop here because we're running out of time. But that's what I'm trying to show here is that the Talmud has to take different considerations because we're looking at the letter of the law. We also have to look at policy. We also have to look at commerce. We also have to look at effect at the market. But even if we're going to say we want to protect the market, we do so carefully and only as much as possible. And we want to protect everybody's interests, unlike the market overt of the Europeans, which was much more geared to protect the market, but not looking at the full picture. And therefore, sometimes the results that you get in that case were sort of distorted. So I'm not saying Talmud system is perfect, but I'm saying is that it's an attempt to protect as much as possible all parties involved. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you for joining. This has been fun for me. I appreciate your time this wonderful afternoon. And we have one more class in this series next Wednesday at noon, God willing, in good health. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.